Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
There's no sugarcoating. The spot market is bleak right now. And sure, the experts say we've likely hit the bottom, but how long will we scrape along? Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation joins the program to break down their latest market report. In the 1980s, Pennsylvania instituted a tax on large trucks. The tax ended up in court where it was found unconstitutional, but the path there is an interesting story in trucking history. As part of our continuing coverage of OOIDA's 50th anniversary, I'll cover the case and its impact with OOIDA historian Sandy Sonker. Also on today's program, seen a USB sitting around in a public place lately and thought about picking it up? Ever connect to public Wi-Fi at a truck stop or restaurant or basically anywhere? You could be setting yourself up for a cybersecurity nightmare. Jason Lutz and Aaron Phillips of OOIDA's IT department stopped by with some useful tips for keeping the cyber criminals at bay. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today surrounds a debate around speed limiters. The two sides continue pushing back against each other. The latest update comes from the Trucking Alliance and safety groups, which released statements this week opposing the Drive Act. That legislation, introduced in both the House and Senate, would prohibit the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration from moving forward with any rule or regulation mandating speed limiters on heavy-duty trucks. The Trucking Alliance and safety groups wrote that the legislation would, quote, hinder FMCSA from fulfilling its public safety mission to reduce crashes, injuries, and fatalities involving large trucks and buses, end quote. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association is strongly opposed to even the idea of a speed limiter mandate and strongly for the Drive Act. In response to the Trucking Alliance letter, OOIDA President Todd Spencer said the alliance is, quote, wrapping their opposition to the Drive Act in some sort of perverse argument about safety, end quote. Spencer added that the number of speeding tickets and crashes by their member carriers clearly show that speed limiters are, quote, not the silver bullet. If they were truly concerned, Spencer wrote, they would pay their drivers by the hour and reduce the pressure to speed in locations where it's clearly unsafe. Representative Josh Brakeen of Oklahoma, who introduced the Drive Act in the House, said that if FMCSA is allowed to determine the top speed of trucks, it would remove a state's ability to govern its roads. OOIDA agrees. Jay Grimes, the association's director of federal affairs, said certain groups like the Alliance and American Trucking Associations believe they're better suited than state DOTs to determine safe speeds for all highway users, even though Congress delegated that authority to the states nearly 30 years ago. The Drive Act has 27 co-sponsors in the House and 5 in the Senate. FMCSA has yet to provide an update on its plans for a speed limiter mandate or to give many details, including that top speed it's pondering. But the agency is expected to unveil that in a formal proposal later this year. The U.S. Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General says it is committed to investigating double brokering amongst freight carriers. That statement came in the form of a letter that was in response to another sent recently by several members of Congress who asked that the DOT address the rampant rise in broker fraud cases. The Office of Inspector General said this week it would continue to collaborate with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to investigate double brokering and other fraud schemes. OOIDA welcomes the willingness to help, but wants more action. Colin Long, OOIDA Director of Government Affairs, said FMCSA is moving in the right direction on finally ensuring that brokers comply with federal transparency requirements. But Long added it doesn't seem like anyone at DOT has the tools, resources, or motivation to tackle what has become rampant broker fraud. In their letter, the members of Congress asked for the creation of a task force to combat the problems. The Office of Inspector General did not address that request in its letter. 3 companies that had asked the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to ease the experience requirements for driver training instructors have withdrawn their request. That request came last month from Millis Transfer, Heartland Express, and Contract Freighters. They wanted FMCSA to allow them to use instructors with only 1 year of experience driving a commercial motor vehicle. Current regulations require trainers have at least 2 years. The company said at the time that they needed the exemption because they were having trouble hiring enough trainers to meet demand. FMCSA did open up the request to a 30-day public comment period, which runs through Monday, August 28th. But the companies have since pulled their exemption request without providing a reason why. As of this morning, nearly 100 comments had been posted to the regulations.gov website, the majority coming from truck drivers who are opposed to the exemption. Navistar has another new recall now in effect, the company recalling more than 600 international trucks after discovering an issue with the drive shaft. The issue affects certain 2023 MV and HV trucks. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the drive shaft can break under certain loading conditions. Dealers will be making the fixes free of charge. Notification letters are going out to owners in mid-October. By our account, Navistar models have received the recall treatment at least half a dozen times this year, with issues ranging from the anti-lock braking indicator light to the HVAC system to grill problems and more. The amount of cargo freight moving through U.S. ports is largely down. The Port of Los Angeles says it processed more than 684,000 20-foot equivalent containers, or TEUs, in July, down more than 25% compared to a year earlier when port activity was booming. In a statement, the Port of Los Angeles attributed the decline to global trade easing as warehouse inventories of retailers and manufacturers remain elevated. They did add, however, that American consumers are likely to find more discounted items this year for the fall and holiday shopping seasons as a result. Other ports are also seeing less cargo. The Port of Long Beach is reporting a 26% decline in volume. The Northwest Seaport Alliance, which operates ports in Seattle and Tacoma, reports a 10% decline. And the ports of Savannah, Virginia, and Charleston are also down compared to July of last year. Some ports did fare better last month, though. Those include the Port of Oakland and Port Houston, both of which posted gains. The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance has released results of its unannounced enforcement blitz of hazmat haulers. It happened over 5 days in June. CVSA says more than 7,500 vehicles transporting hazardous materials were inspected, with 37 jurisdictions participating throughout the U.S. and Canada. About 2,500 violations were written up, the majority for paperwork, endorsement, loading, and securement issues. More than 700 vehicles were placed out of service. And finally, it was another successful year for the annual Waupun Truckin' Show in Wisconsin. Nancy Kutchenreiter is the show's vice president. She says aside from some bad weather that forced the cancellation of the light show, it was a great year.
Besides that, there was roughly 275 in competition. Over 50 parade-only trucks came, so it was a variety. A lot of new people came to the show. We did a little facelift. We sold out of vendor spots, all these different vendors that were there, variety for everybody. I believe it was an awesome show.
A portion of the proceeds from the show goes to benefit 3 different organizations: the Waupun Area Animal Shelter, Reach Relief, and Make-A-Wish.
There was 4 families, I believe, there for that. And then we sponsor one of them. And Miles is actually going to San Diego Zoo in California in March of 2024. So we gave him his wish, and that's what it's all about. It's all about the kids and helping families and kids. That's what the Waupun Truck Show is really for.
Next year will mark 35 years for the show. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, we'll hear about the state of the spot market from Andrew King at the OOIDA Foundation. I'll discuss a court case that continues to affect trucking today with OOIDA historian Sandy Sonker, and we'll hear how to protect yourself from cybercriminals from Jason Lutz and Aaron Phillips of OOIDA's IT department. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
For can't miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a cat scale.
When you weigh on a cat scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Welcome back. It's the end of the month, which means it's time to check in with our friends at the OOIDA Foundation for a look at spot market conditions. That conversation has been pretty bleak of late, so let's see if Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation has some good news for us today. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. Let's see if the spot market is doing well here and the market overall here. These numbers we should mention and remind people. This analysis as well is from July, and I want to start off by noting that the foundation report here, I'm going to read it off here. It says operating costs still high, volume and demand both still soft, capacity loose, and rates are flat. Not a lot of good news there, Andrew, but let's sift through this and find some helpful information. And I want to start by asking you if you're encouraged by anything. Give us something here in this report that could maybe make us feel less worse about where things are.
Yeah, I would say the housing market is actually one of the encouraging spots. It seemed like it was dropping down pretty quick there in the beginning of the year. And, with all the interest rates being raised, there wasn't a lot of hope for that. So thinking that it would go down even further, and that would be a really bad thing because usually the economy overall and housing are tied together really close. But housing in general generates a lot of freight. Not just building the house, but the things that they fill the house with, like furniture and appliances and things like that. It generates a lot of freight. And so it has seen a little bit of a rebound. So if you look at the chart in the report, there's kind of this trench, but it seems to have gone over to the other side now. So that is a positive sign because we'll need something like that to help pull us out of this freight recession that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting over the coming months because you and I have talked about this, and we've talked with other people as well who kind of see this, lull. I guess that's a polite way to put it, but this period kind of lasting a few more months into maybe, hopefully, early 2024, which is when most people, it seems, think that things are going to kind of turn around here. So we'll be looking for signs like the one you just mentioned there with the housing market. And housing construction to, again, kind of glean some positives out of this very difficult time that we're going through right now. We like to run through each of the load types when we do this, when we talk to you, Andrew, because it can give us a clearer picture of what's happening out there. And let's kind of go through it here. Let's start with van, where I notice a difference between spot and contract rates still hovering right around that 50-cent mark. We saw some gains, it looks like, in June, but we took a step back in July. What are the numbers there telling us with van?
Yeah, and that's a good point with the spread between the spot and the contract market. We've talked about that a lot in the past, about how we need to see that in order for the freight recession really to switch, or for the next freight cycle to begin. And unfortunately, as we'll talk about with all the trailer types, it went the wrong direction, which is not super encouraging. But when we look at van load to truck ratios, which of course we get from DAT, it did take up just a little bit month over month, about 2% to 2.64 loads for every truck. And it's important to keep in mind, as we talked about before, that there's typically the seasonal trend in freight in general. And when you get after the 4th of July, there's usually a down period. This is going to be the slowest part of our summer. It's not the slowest part of the year. That's usually January, is usually the slowest, January, February, that first quarter. And so when we say all these numbers, it's important to keep that in mind, too, that, it's not super encouraging, but there also is a seasonal trend here as well. And so the big thing that we might be looking for coming up is peak season, which would be when kids kind of go back to school, which, of course, is already happening, but we won't have that data for another month or so. And as we go into the holiday shopping season. So hopefully we see a little bit of demand pickup from that, but we'll watch it closely. And so with the van spot rates, even though the load to truck ratio went up, spot rates actually decreased 2 cents month over month to $2.06, and that's including a fuel surcharge. So that's not good.
Yeah.
And that's 58 cents lower than where we were last year. And of all the three trailer types, I would say van and reefer might be the most promising. Flatbed, definitely a lot of concerns there.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned the fuel surcharge there, and that's one thing I wanted to point out and ask you about as well, because diesel, obviously, we've seen prices going back up again in recent weeks, especially, but that is still really having an effect on people out there in terms of, trying to lower that margin there, and it's really taking a hit on people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're operating exclusively in the spot market, I don't know how you could make it. I mean, the prices that you're getting or the rates that you're getting are just so low compared to the cost of operating with this like 60-cent surge here in the last month or so. You know, that's I don't know how anyone could make it, and which is why, again, we always stress, if possible, to try and build direct relationships with shippers, small shippers, because contract rates are fairly insulated from that volatility, and so that's really the way to go if you can.
Yeah, for sure. I think I cut you off when you were headed maybe, I'm kind of reading your mind here, but maybe over to the flatbed market.
Yes.
We'll start where we left off with van there, kind of talking about load to truck ratios. Things have really dropped off here in recent months in the flatbed market, and it appears that trend continued in July. Yeah,
it dropped quite a bit. It dropped 26% month over month of the load to truck ratio to 7.13. So that's 4 months of decline. And if you look at that chart, it really tells the story quite well. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it definitely does that, of just where we were in 2021 and 2022 and now where we are. We really have hit a bottom, and yet it still seems to be declining even more, which is very concerning. As we talked about in previous months, here in the beginning of 2023, flatbed was like really the only bright spot.
Yeah.
And now it has gone down even further than the other two. And so that's definitely a concern. I mean, that's hit spot market or the spot rate quite a bit. It decreased 2.7% or 7 cents over month over month to $2.53 per mile. And again, that's with a fuel surcharge. And so the spread between contract and spot increased quite a bit. It increased 12 cents, and it is now standing at, there's a 67 cents per mile difference between where contract rates are and where spot rates are. And that's pretty concerning. That's going the wrong direction of what we want to see. And so, unfortunately, it might be that we have further to fall before something changes. It seems like we're just going to be hitting this bottom continually for the next few months, as you kind of mentioned at the beginning of the show, until some form of demand really appears to bring us out of this recession.
Yeah, and with regard to flatbed, it's not surprising in some ways, because this is typically not a great time of the year for flatbed haulers. But again, when you compare what we're seeing right now to quote-unquote normal years before the pandemic, 2019 and so on and so forth, that's when it starts getting concerning, right? Because as you kind of alluded to there, construction spending is up throughout the country. So I guess the question is, and maybe you have the answer to this, but do we know what's weighing down the flatbed market right now? Is this mostly inflationary pressure? I mean, do we have an idea of what's going on?
I think that's the inflationary pressure is part of it, because, I've noticed as I've been tracking the construction spending for a while, especially in highway and street spending, as well as non-residential construction spending. If you look at the chart, it's going flat, and then around 2022, it just starts ticking up and up and up, and it's not really going down. And yet, what's happening? And so I would think inflation is the reason why the numbers look higher. These aren't inflation-adjusted numbers. And so that definitely is going to cause an impact. But we have such a lull when it comes to machinery, and even manufacturing is kind of tempering a little bit. as well as just industrial production in general, and that's going to be a heavy driver of flatbed. So I'm thinking all those kind of combined together have really put us where we are today. And so I don't foresee that really changing for the next few months, unless for some reason, if you remember in 2017, 2018, we had a couple of hurricanes, I believe Harvey and Irma, that really changed things. That actually brought us out of the freight recession we were in at the time. And obviously that's not something we want to see happen because that's the tragedy of itself. But we are in hurricane season, and that can potentially change things. But, that's not something you can necessarily bet on.
No, and obviously not root for necessarily either.
Exactly.
But it is a good reminder that there are strings attached to the trucking industry from every corner of the economy, and one tug here means that something moves in this direction, and so on and so forth. So we'll keep an eye on that we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Real quick here, a little less pessimism, perhaps maybe in the reefer market. Load posts there are up compared to the time before the pandemic. Spot rates maybe looking a little better there. What are we seeing?
Yeah, so again, kind of similar with the van trailer type is that the load to truck ratio increased just slightly, but yet the rates are still falling. Spot rates decreased 6 cents to $2.43, but the contract rate stayed flat at $2.89. So that made that spread increase, just like it did with the van and flat. So again, that's kind of a concerning trend. Usually around this time of year, as we get a little bit closer to the holiday season, you'll see a great uptick in refrigerated volumes usually during this time. So that's kind of concerning that it's not boosting the rates a little bit more, but we still have a couple months to go. And so hopefully we see something there change as well.
Yeah, we're all kind of, again, sitting around here and looking for some sort of positive change, and looking forward to when things kind of turn around and what that's going to look like. But yeah, it's a lot of uncertainty out there. Obviously, this report underlining that, as it always does. I always want to talk to you here at the end because, especially over the past several months, we've been kind of delivering this bad news that people are feeling out there, obviously. The tips that you would have for people, and I know you're going to talk about this during Truck to Success in October in terms of, business plan and weathering storms and making sure that everything's in place to make sure your business is running as best it can. But just some advice here for people with a couple minutes left. If they are struggling, if they are looking for, ways to kind of get around all this, what would you say to them?
Well, I'll just go back to what I said a few minutes ago, and that was building that direct relationship with the shipper. And there are ways that you can find shippers. If you're thinking, well, I don't really know how to do that, we have some information on that in our Truck to Success course in particular of how to find shippers and kind of build that relationship with them. Because if you can build more of that contract rate, I'm thinking of one of our board members who has, a few trucks, and they run exclusively contract. And because of that, they are basically protected from all of this that's going on. And that's really what we need to do is build that relationship with shippers, or even it has to be a broker, but just not relying solely on the spot market. If you do that, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, and this is a great time, just to kind of, again, underline what you said there. This is a great time to develop those relationships, especially because, everybody out there is feeling it in one way or another. And if you can develop that network, especially now, for the next time this happens, because it will happen again, unfortunately. This is just the way the trucking industry goes. But now is the time to develop those if you haven't already. Andrew, we appreciate the relationship we've developed with you on the program here. You don't always bring great news, but again, it's helpful information, important information for people out there as they try to navigate these troubled waters, as we like to call them. So we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And we also encourage folks out there to check out the report, the July report, for themselves with all the graphs and charts and information and analysis on the OOIDA Foundation website. Our thanks to Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation. Landline Now is back in just a moment.
You trust PrePass for more bypasses? Now let PrePass help with tolls. PrePass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. course, I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
Landline Now, welcome back. It's time for another of our 50 on 50. 50 significant events from OOIDA's history in celebration of the association's 50th anniversary.
Landline Now, welcome back. In the 1980s, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania instituted an axle tax on large trucks. The tax ended up in court where it was found unconstitutional, but the path there is an interesting story in trucking history. Here to discuss it is OOIDA's historian, Sandy Sonker. Sandy, welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
Let's talk about the tax first. I mean, what was this tax? How did this thing work?
Well, the tax was a $36 per truck axle tax and a $25 marker fee. So it was something that the Commonwealth Court in Pennsylvania had ruled it unconstitutional. The state appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and that decision was reversed. The plaintiffs was the American Trucking Association. And, of course, they were representing motor carriers. The ATA then took this case and appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it just, when I came to work for OOIDA in 1987, this case was the fire that was just burning up the headlines in trucking. I was trying desperately to understand what was going on, who was the good guys, who was the bad guys, and how the little guys were going to benefit with this. Because it looked like to me that the big guys were fighting to get the money back for the big companies, the big motor carriers. They were on the tax rolls. But guess who was paying some of these taxes themselves were owner-operators and leased operators working for those big motor carriers. Were they going to get any of that money back? That's a lot of money.
Absolutely. And, of course, it doesn't sound like a lot when it's 36 and 25, but we're talking about thousands upon thousands of truckers who are paying those fees. And this was anybody essentially who passed through Pennsylvania, right?
Right.
So it wasn't just the people that were operating out of Pennsylvania. This ended up, you said, at the Supreme Court. Talk a little bit about that case. What happened there?
Well, the Supreme Court at that time, and there were some really big legendary justices that studied this case. Harry Blackmun was one, John Paul Stevens, William Brennan, Thurgood Marshall. Those were Byron White. Those were the guys that studied these arguments. They evaluated the charges, and when they made a ruling, it was the blockbuster. It was a significant precedent in the world of trucking. It's just like, okay, it happened in June of 1987, and that court struck down the truck fees as discriminatory. And the state of Pennsylvania was ordered to reimburse motor carriers. Yay, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it, but
not so much.
Yeah.
Well, it created the problem because refunding the money to the motor carriers on the state tax rolls was basically ignoring the leased owner-operators who actually paid the tax themselves. That was a plan that OOIDA couldn't live with. I remember the executives, our president at that time, Jim Johnston, meeting with lawyers. Todd Spencer was there, some board members, because it just wasn't anything that they could walk away from and let happen. Owner-operators don't have deep pockets or time to pursue that. So we got together with our lawyers and waded in. And basically, we have never stopped.
So got involved in the case. How did they get involved in the case? What was OOIDA contending in court, and how did they get into this case that was already filed by ATA?
Well, to put it simply, we filed as interveners to make sure that these owner-operators that were leased to the motor carriers were fairly reimbursed as well. And that would be by receiving the refunds directly. Because if they went back to the motor carrier, most of our members were like not trusting that they would get fairly or completely, reimbursed, or that money would be passed on. So you're probably going to wonder how much money we were successful in getting back to be distributed.
Absolutely.
$38.3 million.
And did the bulk of that go to the owner-operators?
It sure did. Yep, it did. That was huge. It was something that put in place a plan like, okay, there's $38.3 million the court has said this is a portion that goes back to owner-operators. Then you have to figure out, how do we get it to them? Yeah, that was probably one of my first big stories, was following the Pennsylvania axle tax and how it actually got back to the guys that paid it.
So how did it?
Well, we had the law firm, our law firm in D.C., our general counsel, set up a special distribution plan, and that had to be approved by motor carriers. It had to be approved by ATA. It had to, fill the bill. And then we were in charge of finding those people. So we could get the tax rolls, the state tax rolls from Pennsylvania, and we could look through and see, like, a large motor carrier like ABC Trucking. Okay, did they have any owner-operators working for them during these years? We had to sort those out. We had to say, okay, we need for you, motor carrier, to give us the names of those guys. Do you have any that still work for you? Oh, no, they're all quit. Well, how do you find them when they've quit? It was quite a deal. We had one of the attorneys that was his job full-time, and assistants as well. And we had a large membership base here. Current names, current addresses. We found so many of these guys through our membership, through our insurance. If you add insurance, you have an address that's good. But that was quite a deal, and it took years to find and actually refund, cut those checks, get them back. That was a legal precedent that once it began to work, I know we would have guys like, Dave Sweetman, and people listening out there will be maybe familiar with Dave Sweetman. He writes for Landline. But I remember he got a check back. And he had said, guys, we're getting these checks in. Is this a real deal? Should I, should I not cash this? When I cash this check out, what am I committing to? And they would call us, and we would be able to say, it's free and clear. You got a couple $100 there. Maybe you have $800. Maybe you only got like $42 back, but it's yours. You paid it. And it was pretty satisfying, hugely. Needless to say, as one of my first stories here and not knowing very much about trucking, it was exciting to me.
So let's talk a little bit about the court here, because the court was very important in that. And you said before we started talking, why is it important who we have on the Supreme Court? And this is a good example of that. Why did it matter who we had on the Supreme Court then?
Absolutely. I mean, you have people who were going, if they were going to side with the state, if they were going to basically ignore the little guy. You got to have somebody on the Supreme Court that fairly represents little guys. And I think that was a time that the court really did show that they were fair. I mean, it just when they made that ruling and they struck down that case as discriminatory, how huge was that? I mean, in the face of the state of Pennsylvania and a whole lot of money, I'm sure that it was a fair decision, but certainly made a lot of people really unhappy. Who you have on the court, it could have gone the other way. You could have had people on the court that would say, no, we're gonna support state of Pennsylvania. You know, this is. But the Commerce Clause, you think back in those days that you had a lot of people like Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan on the court that were true constitutionalists. You know, they were like, let's not mess with the Constitution. And, you know, Article 1, Commerce Clause, is a very clear protection for interstate truckers. If you do something that restricts their business, restricts their movement unfairly, then you've got a Commerce Clause to fall back on.
So with this precedent in place, what happened?
Well, there were more lawsuits that were filed. The trucking associations, and I say plural associations because there's the National Private Truck Council and ATA and OOIDA as well. But those guys that had big lawyers and big money, ATA, Truck Council, they filed against Indiana, Arkansas, Vermont, similar taxes and fees. And, of course, with the, and I call it the Shiner case, with the Pennsylvania case in place, those states fell like dominoes. There are millions of dollars that were returned to the trucking companies. And then, thanks to OOIDA, the owner-operators who paid those fees were among those beneficiaries.
They got their money back.
They got their money back. If they were still alive and trucking on this earth, we found them. It was pretty neat. It was an awesome thing to watch. One of the largest refunds came from Alabama. And were you around with it when the Alabama case was going on? That was astounding. It was like $68 million. And they were discriminating against out-of-state truckers. And they wanted them to pay a marker fee, which was not required of in-state truckers.
Well, Sandy, we're out of time for this topic.
What? We're out of time?
We're out of time, but it's interesting stuff. Thank you very much for a little bit of history.
Thank you, Mark.
I've been talking with OOIDA historian Sandy Sonker. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. Please stay with us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
That was another of our 50 on 50. 50 significant events from OOIDA's history in celebration of the association's 50th anniversary. We'll bring you a new entry every week from now until the actual anniversary celebration. Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Welcome back, Scott Thompson here, and we're going to wrap things up today with some helpful advice that could keep you out of trouble. Cybersecurity threats seem to be all over the place these days, so we thought we'd do our best to help, and we do that with the help of two guys who keep OOIDA safe. Jason Lutz and Aaron Phillips are members of the association's IT team, and they both join us here in Studio A. Gentlemen, good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. So we thought this would be a good time to get you in here because, again, every day it seems like we're reading about a new scam or a cyber threat or something that is targeting a huge number of people out there. You two and your colleagues obviously put together a cybersecurity bulletin for OOIDA, and one of the things you mentioned recently kind of caught my eye. It's something about USB devices, and I think it's interesting. And Aaron, this is kind of a weird one, I think. I think that's safe to say. It applies to something you might see at a truck stop. Can you kind of explain how this kind of plays out?
Yeah, so for us here at the association, I was kind of talking about how for us specifically, if you see a USB device out in the parking lot, please don't pick it up and put it in your computer because you don't know where it's been, you don't know what's on it, and it could be designed to deliver some sort of bad payload to basically allow remote access into our network here in the building. But
it's like a literal Trojan horse in a way, right?
Yeah, quite literally.
Yeah.
But of course, even if you're not a business, you don't want to do that to your personal computer either. So any sort of USB device out in the wild, just leave it there.
It's crazy
fine.
to think about that, though, because, I mean, if you're a scammer, you're obviously kind of planting these things in places you think people might pick them up, might see them, and decide to do what you said there.
Yeah.
And that's the idea, right? They load this thing up with whatever virus, and then they take control of your computer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the relatively new development in that area is it's not just flash drives anymore. It's now also USB cables. So you might see one and think, hey, free charging cable. Nope. Same rule applies. They can hide viruses in the cables now. They put a little chip in it, modify it, and it's a fully programmable device.
And that's something I've seen in news reports about airports specifically, where obviously people are trying to charge their devices. But the same thing would apply to a truck stop, I imagine, as well.
Yeah, public charging stations now also can be targeted through the USB ports. So if you have one of those, it's best to use your full wall adapter charging brick.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, just do your due diligence. You might think, hey, I'm getting a free flash drive. Or you're actually getting
cable.
A free ride to Headacheville, I guess, in other words. Something else you might not think about at a truck stop, and Jason, you can chime in here too, and this applies to everybody, not just truck stops, but for me, for you, for anybody listening out there regarding public Wi-Fi. I know I will go out sometimes. I will see some Wi-Fi there and I'll connect to it thinking, hey, I've got some free Wi-Fi. But even doing that, be very careful as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. So whenever you're on a free Wi-Fi network, you are out in the open for anyone who is connected to that same network. So if you are on there, someone else can use scanning tools to find everyone else, and then they can start trying to access your device. Once they access your device, it's fair game for them. And that's just the device itself. So if you are accessing, let's say, email, your login and password is transmitted from your device to that server. Well, those scanning tools can actually scan the data that is transmitted back and forth, and they can steal that from you without you ever knowing.
That was going to be my question. Do you even know that's going on?
No idea.
You log into public Wi-Fi and you've just opened up the gates.
And if you are so used to doing that, you may never know where it happened. If you absolutely need to be on a public Wi-Fi, you need to make sure you have a firewall, an antivirus, and any other possible tool that can help you. Multi-factor authentication would be a good idea as well. But preferably don't use it at all. If you have, let's say, a cell phone with your own data source, use it. Don't use public Wi-Fi unless you have protection on your device.
And that goes for any public Wi-Fi, right?
Any
That goes
public
for a
Wi-Fi.
coffee shop, fast
Anything
food
at all.
restaurant.
Because
any of those, okay.
Let's say you're sitting in McDonald's and all you're doing is checking your email. Somebody could be out in the parking lot doing all kinds of stuff that you have no idea about. So it's best to just simply not use it or have a good security package that's going to encrypt your data, protect your device, and so on.
And you'd have no idea, again, that was happening until what? I mean, the first sign would be that you're hacked.
Exactly.
Okay.
Whether you're hacked, whether it's the device, whether you can't get into your email or your bank account, and it may not happen for hours, months, years, because that data sometimes is stolen and then sold on the black market for whoever wants to use it and, well, basically destroy your life.
Yeah, and that's wild because I myself, and I know plenty of people out there, do this, right? I mean, even if you go into again, you said McDonald's one time and you connect to the Wi-Fi there, the next time you go there, it automatically connects again, and you're not even realizing that you're opening yourself up again for
absolutely
all those bad actors out there. And there are a lot of them these days, unfortunately, as we've kind of talked about here. That is one issue in terms of letting people in. And I think that's a relatively easy way to let people in. And again, you don't even realize it. Another one that's happening, and we talk about this all the time, and you guys email about this all the time, and I see news articles all the time about phishing scams.
Yes.
And they are everywhere, and these are also really easy to fall for. Even if you think you're following all the steps and looking for everything that you need to look for, this is a big thing these days. Can you talk a little bit about how this is evolving and what exactly you're doing with the phishing scams if you become a victim or make yourself a victim, I guess?
Right. For phishing, mainly the goal is to get you to turn over information about yourself or your company, if it's a company email. So the main point of phishing is to hack you, the person that they're talking to get you to let them in and get information out through you. So that's why it's so important, and why it's so important for everybody to be aware that can happen, and be aware of the different things that can be done to get you on the phone or emailing them back or however they're trying to communicate with you.
Yeah, and as a truck driver, this is, especially important because your email a lot of times becomes public record. As soon as you get your authority, you start getting a ton of emails and phone calls and everything on down the line. And it can be real easy, and people get tripped up by this all the time, thinking that an email is legitimate and thinking that you need to do something to keep your business going, when in fact it becomes something else. Real quick here, and we're short on time, unfortunately, but just the tips that you have to make sure people are staying safe out there with phishing scams.
Well, first off, if you're not expecting an email and you receive one for changing your password, don't click anything in it.
Red flag, yeah.
Exactly. Go directly to the website and then change your password if you don't feel comfortable. But don't click anything in an email if you are not expecting it.
Yeah, that's simple. And think twice before you click on links, before you open up files, right? Simple things that you can do. Again, it's hard because we get so many emails, and especially as a trucking professional, you get a lot of these and you think that I need to do this for my business. But just think twice, do your due diligence. We've hit a lot of topics here. Phishing scams, we talked about the USB, don't pick them up, don't put them in your computer. And then also with public Wi-Fi, just don't get on there. So solid advice. We're going to keep having these conversations over time to kind of make sure that people are doing what they can to protect themselves. But Jason, Aaron, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Our thanks to Aaron Phillips and Jason Lutz of the OOIDA IT team. And our thanks to you for listening to Landline Now. We're back tomorrow. We hope to talk to you then.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer. photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
My kids.
chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together, we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.